Legend of Terrible here, and today we're doing another Legendary Lord power comparison, this time covering the Skaven. This is where we take a Legendary Lord, not their faction, and apply 3 different criteria and judge them based on that. So how strong they are personally in battle, how strong they are in commanding their forces in battle, and the value that they provide to the faction as a whole, the faction-wide bonuses. So a score out of 10 determining those 3 qualities. A 3 being sort of the base mark for where they provide nothing, and then 2 would be a negative, like they actually hurt the faction in some way. So with that, let's get in and talk about the number 6 spot, which I'm pretty sure you guys can guess. Coming in at number 6, I don't think anyone's surprised by seeing Tretch Craventail here. Tretch is possibly the worst Legendary Lord in the game, period. I don't think I've given anybody anywhere close to as low score as what Tretch has scored here. He's actually made sucking sort of an art form. He is really good at being bad. So let's go through and assess what his problems are. So in terms of battle power, I'm giving him a 5 out of 10, which I think is the lowest score I've ever given any Legendary Lord for battle power. I'm usually pretty generous with battle power because it's pretty easy for Legendary Lords to be valuable on the battlefield. But the thing is with Tretch is that he's not. He's a melee lord, but he's not very good in melee. He has no spellcasting ability. The only thing that's really his saving grace is that he has regeneration. Now, the funny thing about Tretch is that the game sort of realizes that he's so bad that most of his abilities will only ever activate when he's actually losing anyway. So, for example, if we have a look at the Lucky Skull Helm, this only activates when he's losing in melee, where he gets a 33% damage resistance, which is pretty good. But the thing is, if that turns the tide of the fight and he starts winning the fight, he loses it, in which case, it doesn't really help him to win the fight that much. The only thing I could really see Tretch being good for is to hold the enemy back. He does have a very high melee defense, and with the damage resistance, it would help him to just hold the enemy back while better units did damage, such as Rattling Guns, Jezzails, artillery, that kind of stuff, if you want to do it that way. He would actually be fairly decent at doing that, but I'm not going to award him that many points for it, which is why he didn't get like a 3 out of a 10. The next thing we're going to assess him on is the command power, in which case I'm going to give him another 5 out of 10. Tretch does not boost his army by very much. He boosts pretty mediocre units, like he boosts Clan Rats and Storm Vermin, which makes sense because he's in Clan Rictus and that's sort of their MO. But they're not super valuable units, and you can go through your entire campaign on Legendary difficulty without ever recruiting them. And it's okay if you like Clan Rats and Storm Vermin, but I'm not going to put value on taste. They're not particularly good units. They don't perform well. Even if you're good with Storm Vermin, it's very difficult to get any real value out of them, especially on the higher battle difficulties, just because the AI does get a significant boost, and these units are quite expensive for what they do. Their stats are actually quite bad. Really, they're just there as meat shields, which is pretty bad for your elite infantry. So in terms of what stats he does provide them, when he's ambushing an enemy, he gives all of his units in his army 13 extra melee attack. Now that's primarily where he's getting all of his points, because that's pretty good. And if you are going to focus on a melee lord with melee infantry, Tretch Craventail is probably your guy. But I don't recommend doing that. I just don't think that's very effective. There's better ways of going about it. So again, not going to get scored too many points. He also gets 13 melee attack if he withdraws from a fight and then has to fight again that very same turn. But again, I don't think it's a good idea to incentivize players to lose, only then to maybe win after that fight. So I'm not going to award many points for that, because I don't think that's a very good ability. Now, going back into his skill tree, he does have an ability here called Tretch's Raiders. This one's alright. So if his soldiers are winning in combat and he's nearby them, they'll be given a 9 melee attack, 12% base weapon damage, and armor-piercing weapon damage buff, which is pretty good. But again, the problem is that Skaven infantry tend to lose in most matchups against similar tiered units. So this is probably something that's not going to activate lots of times. So it's not super useful. Now, he does also provide missile resistance for Clan Rats and Storm Vermin units, and also increases their speed. But that's just for his army, so that's okay. It's not great. And then finally, his faction power. Tretch Craventail gets a 3 out of 10 because he does nothing. There are no faction-wide bonuses that he provides at all. He doesn't provide any negatives, but he provides no buffs to the faction. He has no value at all. So overall, Tretch Craventail is getting a 4.3 out of 10. Tretch Craventail makes Grimgor Ironhide look like a 10 out of 10. And I think Grimgor sucks. So Tretch Craventail, I'll be hard pressed to find a Legendary Lord that scores lower than 4.3. And in all honesty, I think I'm being pretty generous with that score. Anyway, let's move on to number 5. Coming in at the number 5 spot is going to be Deathmaster Snitch. Now, before you sit there and say, what? But Snitch is really good. I actually agree, Snitch is really good. That's why he's getting a way higher score than Tretch Craventail. It's just that the other Skaven Legendary Lords, well, they're actually really good too. And they scored a little bit higher than Snitch. Now, another thing to point out is that clan mechanics, being like Shadowy Dealings, the Flesh Laboratory, and the Forbidden Workshop, those are clan abilities, not Legendary Lord abilities, so they're not going to be applied. If we were to apply those scores onto them, then the DLC Lords will have a huge discrepancy over the FLC and base game Lords, and so I don't think it's fair to apply that, since it's possible for Legendary Lords from other factions to actually make use of the clan mechanics if you get them. And the same thing is if Snitch is confederated out of Clan Eshin, he no longer gets access to the Shadowy Dealings. It's purely a Clan Eshin ability. Anyway, his battle power, I'm going to rate it as 8 out of 10. He's excellent in melee, but he's not the best melee lord. Snitch's really ideal MO is he goes in and kills things, kills lords specifically. He's very good at it, but he's not necessarily a duelist. He's got a very low health pool, and he's very bad at dealing with units that are mounted because he gets knocked down quite easily because he's quite light on his foot. So what you want to do with Snitch is have the hero or lord tied down with clan rats or Skaven slaves or anything, and then Snitch comes from behind and just stabs him in the back, because he's got tons of weapon strength and tons of melee attack, but he doesn't have much melee defense. Another thing is that he is actually very good at dealing with huge mobs of infantry, because he's got an ability called Whirl of Weeping Blades, which is surprisingly good at killing, especially cavalry as well, good at killing them. So yeah, overall, I'm going to give him an 8 out of 10, because he's good at melee, he's just not good in a fair fight, but that's not exactly what he's designed for. The next thing to assess on him is his command power. I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10. Now, he doesn't really boost his army by very much, but one thing he does do is that he reduces the entire army cost by 25% of their base cost, thanks to contract loopholes. Now, this is very useful in the early game, where the Skaven economy has not really kicked off yet, so Snitch's army is fairly cheap, which is good to have him around for that. Another thing that he does, he's got an absurdly high ambush success chance, which is very useful for Skaven. And he does provide an extra melee attack buff for all lords and all heroes attached to his army. So that's through his trait over here, where he gets that bonus. And there's the ambush success chance. So he's got some pretty good bonuses in there. Now, in terms of what he applies to the faction, I'm going to give him a 6 out of 10 as well. Contract loopholes gives a +3 Lord recruit rank for Lords and Heroes, which is especially useful for Skaven because you want them to be able to recruit as high level as possible. But specifically with Lords, if you want to cheese the game, you want to get them to rank 13 as quickly as possible so that you can cheese the economy with Ravenous Expansion with the Lords. And getting Snitch early, or starting with Snitch, can allow you to do that much quicker than with other Legendary Lords. So he's going to get a 6 out of 10. It's not the best buff ever, but it is pretty good. And so overall, Snitch is going to get a 6.6 out of 10, which is more than 2 points higher than Tretch Craventail. So a 6.6, it's not the best score, but it's pretty decent. He's a good Legendary Lord. Let's now move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is Queek Headtaker. So Queek's battle power, just going straight into it, he's going to get a 7 out of 10. He's not the best melee lord in the game, and he's certainly not the worst. But one thing that he's particularly good at doing is cracking dwarf skulls. Dwarfs are high melee defense, high armored units, and Queek is particularly good at punching through that. Because if we look at his skills, he's already starts off with a lot of armor piercing and anti-infantry, but he's got Dwarf Gouger over here, which will give him even more bonus versus infantry, and give him, when activated, 50% armor piercing weapon damage and 24 melee attack. So he's really good at just cracking those high melee defense lords' skulls, and that's what he's good at doing. He's not good at going up against cavalry, not good at going up against monsters, not good at going up against infantry, but this is the thing he is good at. It's not something that I value super heavily, but he's excellent at it, so he's going to get a 7 out of 10. So in terms of command power, I'm also going to give him a 7 out of 10. He's got a trait over here that reduces upkeep costs for Storm Vermin and Clan Rats by 50% in his army, which is pretty good, especially in the early parts of the campaign. But these aren't units that I would be using in the late campaign, or units that I would value very highly at all anyway, so I'm not going to put too many points on that. There's also the army ability number of uses for Menace Below, +2. That is something I'm going to value quite highly, because that is excellent. Menace Below is one of the most useful Skaven abilities in the game, and it's one of the things that makes Skaven so annoying to deal with, because if you've got any kind of artillery and you're dealing with Skaven and they've got Menace Below, you have to be in a constantly keeping an eye on those artillery, because a Menace Below can wipe out pretty much any artillery unit in the game. So that is to say something like, you know, a Hellstorm rocket battery or an organ gun. I'm not talking about a friggin' Necrofex Colossus. That's not going to work on that. Another thing that he does is through Violent Rise to Power, he's got ambush success chance plus 25%. This is also really good because you want to be doing as many ambushes as possible with the Skaven, and increasing that chance just makes it more likely to get one. And over here in his Warp Shard armor, this gives him some nice buffs for his own personal strength, but also causes a debuff in the area for 40 meters. So again, really good for dealing with dwarfs. Now, finally, his faction power, I'm going to give him 7 out of 10. Again, so he's getting 7 out of 10 on everything, so his overall rating is 7 out of 10. And the bonuses he provides, it's pretty good. He provides +2 public order all provinces with Violent Rise to Power. And he provides reduced upkeep cost 10% for all Clan Rat units faction-wide. So I don't value Clan Rats that much, but reducing their upkeep cost by 10% is pretty good. Now, another thing with Queek that really needs to be said is that he actually provides some negatives as well. So he would have otherwise scored maybe an 8 or even a 9 out of 10 if it wasn't for these negatives, which is extremely distrustful, where the loyalty for new recruits is reduced. And then there's Make Examples, which reduces the loyalty of Greyseer recruits -2 faction-wide. So any Greyseer that you recruit after getting Queek, these two abilities here, is going to have 3 less loyalty than what it said when you were going to recruit them. So for example, if it said that the Greyseer was going to have between 1 and 5 loyalty, what it really means is that they're going to be recruited somewhere between 1 and 2 loyalty. So getting Queek is really bad if you want to recruit Greyseers, which you should want to recruit Greyseers because they're actually the best lords in the Skaven roster. They're excellent, but you know, that's another video going on about that. So overall, Queek is going to get a 7 out of 10 for faction power, and just overall 7 out of 10 as a Legendary Lord. Good Legendary Lord, not the best. Anyway, let's move on now to number 3. Taking the number 3 spot goes to Throt the Unclean, and I think some people are going to be a little bit disappointed by him getting this spot, because I think they were expecting Throt to get way higher than that, especially watching some of those live streams I've been doing. Because there's one thing that Throt is just really lacking. Anyway, we'll get to that shortly. So let's start evaluating him. In terms of his battle power, I'm going to give him a 9 out of 10. He is really good in melee. He's not the best melee lord in the game by any means, but starting off at the start of the campaign when he's on foot, he gets regeneration, he's got really high melee defense, he's very good at tanking, he's way better than Tretch Graventail, and he starts off with regeneration. And then later down the track, he'll get the Brood Horror mount, which again is a really good mount, increases his speed massively, especially for Big Fatso, and makes him even tankier and increases his damage output by heaps. He's got a lot of stuff in here that'll just keep increasing his health, so he's just an incredibly tanky Legendary Lord, but he's not the strongest Lord in the game by any means, and there are some Legendary Lords in the game that will, quite frankly, beat the crap out of him, even if he's on a Brood Horror. Some notable examples are Kolek Suneater and Tyrion will absolutely destroy him. Anyway, let's talk about his command power now. Now, this is where Throt really shines. He's going to get a 10 out of 10. So looking here at his trait, Lord of Hell Pit, they jammed about as much stuff as they could into this. So he is reducing the upkeep cost by 20% for Wolf Rats, Rat Ogres, Mutant Rat Ogres, Brood Horrors, and Hell Pit Abominations in his army, which is particularly useful for him because he should have those units in his army because he can boost them by so much. He also increases their armor, and through his Master of the Mutated skill, it gives him 10% resistance, 12% weapon strength, 8 melee defense, and through Creature Killer over here, he gets an extra 16 bonus versus large for those units that are close by him, and through Remolded, he gives essentially a health potion plus leadership buff and a melee attack buff. All of these things are just really useful. Plus, he can also summon units of rat ogres in every battle, 1 at the start of the campaign, and eventually 2 once you get the unclean one. So very, very useful. Now, the area in which Throt really falls down is his faction power. He's only going to get a 3 out of 10. He doesn't provide anything. If we were to go through and just look at anything we could possibly get out of it, the only thing he provides his faction is Specimen Collector, which provides growth juice gains from battle plus 10%. Now that's only useful if you're playing as Clan Molder. So if you're playing as Clan Moors, for example, you're going to wish he didn't put a point into this, because that's pretty much useless. Apart from, I guess, the income from post-battle loot. But the growth juice, Clan Moors can't make any use of that. So I'm not going to give him any points for that, or if anything, I'm giving him like 0.1 of a point. So overall, Throt the Unclean is going to get a 7.3 out of 10, which is a great score for him. He's a great Legendary Lord, but the lack of faction power, that's what really let him down. Anyway, let's now move on to number 2. Taking the number 2 spot goes to Plague Lord Skrulk. Now I think this is one that a lot of people weren't expecting, because he is a base game lord, and usually the higher up positions are taken by DLC lords just due to power creep. However, Plague Lord Skrulk is definitely up there. He's got a lot of good stuff in his skill tree, and I didn't realize it until I had a look at it, but yeah, he's really good. So in terms of battle power, I have a tendency of giving spellcasters a 10 out of 10, and guess what? Lord Skrulk is getting a 10 out of 10. But I don't think you're going to be too surprised by that, because for one thing, he's got the Lore of Plague, which if I was to redo my top 5 Lore of Magic video, I would have to put the Lore of Plague in there. I probably wouldn't put it at number 1, but it would be in my top 5 somewhere. It's a really good Lore of Plague. Just going over it really briefly, the Vermintide, casting a bunch of clan rats, useful for keeping the enemy at bay. Very useful spell, very cheap. Plague spell, really good at dishing out just tons of damage. One of the most destructive spells at getting rid of infantry and cavalry in the game, and it's really cheap. And then there's Pestilent Birth for summoning some Plague Monks. Also really good, but that's usually a last resort if you just run out of the Vermintides. Now the thing is with the spell Plague is that it normally costs 8 winds of magic if you've got 2 points put into it for most Plague Priests. But Skrulk is so proficient in Plague Lore of Magic in that he can cast it for just 6 winds of magic, which is, you know, significantly less, and you'll get a lot more usage out of your winds of magic pool when using Skrulk. So that's why he's getting a 10 out of 10. He can quite often get hundreds, if not thousands of kills in every single battle. He is an extremely useful Legendary Lord, and you'll be using him, if using it properly, in every single battle where he'll be inflicting massive amounts of damage or just boosting the army by a ton. Now, in terms of his command power, he's going to get a 7 out of 10. Because the only thing he's really got in his skill tree here is the upkeep reduction with his trait with Plague Lord. He reduces the upkeep cost by 50% for Plague Monks, Plague Monk Censer Bearers, and Plague Claw Catapults and Plague Priests. So the Plague Monks and Censer Bearer versions, I don't really value that too highly. They're better than Storm Vermin for sure, but I just don't. Even when playing as Clan Pestilence, I just don't really like to get them. But the Plague Claw Catapults and Plague Priests, those are a must-have for any of the weapons team's army that I would recruit. So reducing the upkeep cost by 50%, that's pretty good. But he doesn't boost them at all. Doesn't boost these units by anything. So all he does is reduce upkeep cost, which is good. Useful for the early campaign. But late campaign, that's not really super useful, which is why he's only going to get a 7 out of 10 there. Now, in terms of his faction power, this is where another area where he really shines. He's going to get a 9 out of 10. There's a lot of things that Lord Skrulk does, and some of them can seem a little bit maybe redundant or excessive. So, going over it, with Plague Lord over here, he reduces the upkeep cost further for Plague Monks and Plague Claw Catapults, and that's faction-wide, so that's pretty useful, especially for the Plague Claw Catapults, not so much for Plague Monks. He also increases the hero capacity for Plague Priest and Eshin Sorcerers by 2, and increases their recruit rank. And then over in the Rod of Corruption, he increases the hero capacity a little bit more. And then in the Liber Bubonicus, increases the recruit rank a little bit more. So increases the recruit ranks by 7 and increases the number of recruits by 3. This is really useful, but it's not like the most amount of faction-wide bonuses. Like comparing it to, for example, Alariel, it's not quite as much, so I didn't quite give him a 10 out of 10 there, because there are Legendary Lords out there that just provide a little bit more, so he just fell a little bit short of that. So overall, Skrulk is going to get an 8.6 out of 10, which is a really strong score. Now let's move on to the number 1 spot, which I'm pretty sure most people guessed right from the start. Let's move on to number 1. taking the number 1 position is Ichaclaw, which I don't think anybody's particularly surprised with. So, the big question now is Ichaclaw a 10 out of 10 Legendary Lord? So far throughout my evaluations, I've only evaluated one Legendary Lord as 10 out of 10. That was Alariel. So, is Ichaclaw going to get that? Because in a video a long time ago, I did put Ichaclaw on a list of top 5 Legendary Lords. Is he still like that? Let's find out. So, but here's the thing, evaluations have changed a little bit in terms of criteria, because that was a while ago. So, in terms of battle power, he's a wizard, he's an excellent melee fighter, he's getting a 4 out of... No, of course it's a 10 out of 10. Of course. Even though he's got the Law of Ruin, one of the things that makes it even better for him is that as he casts, he can regenerate himself. Getting the second Wind Serum is super useful because I usually use Ichaclaw on a Doomflayer or a Doomwheel. You can go either way, but usually I go Doomflayer. Up the front, annoying the enemy line. So he's usually getting shot by archers or gunners or whatever. So he's taking damage. Even though he's got a lot of resistance, he's taking damage. And then he's casting really cheap Warp Lightnings to damage the enemy archers. And also, as a secondary ability, to heal himself by quite a significant amount. Healing 720 hit points for 5 Winds of Magic is pretty damn cheap. So, in terms of battle power, he's going to inflict loads and loads of damage. In addition to that, he's also got the Brass Orb. So, and that's just a free ability that he gets to use. So, that's also very good. Now, in terms of command power, he's got the trait Right Fang of Lord Morskatar. So, that reduces the upkeep costs by 50% for Warp Block Jezzails, Rattling Guns, Warp Fire Thrower weapons teams. These are units that I'm definitely going to recruit into my armies, with the exception of maybe Warp Fire Throwers. They're definitely good units, I just don't particularly recruit them. So, and I usually recruit quite a few of them. So, I'm going to give Ichaclaw a 9 out of 10 for command power, because this is the only thing he actually does. He doesn't actually himself boost these units. It's the Forbidden Workshop that does it. And since that's a Clan Scryer ability, not an Ichaclaw ability, I'm not going to give him any points for that. Now, another thing you might be thinking is, well, Skrulk did more or less the same thing. He reduces upkeep cost by 50%. Why did he get a 7 out of 10, but Ichaclaw got a 9 out of 10? The simple reason for it is, I'm going to recruit more Warp Block Jezzails and Rattling Guns than I will recruit Plague Claw Catapults. So, I'm going to, get better use out of it. And in terms of heroes, that can be a little bit wonky. So, in the early stages of the campaign, you're not going to get that many heroes. And in the late stage of the campaign, when you actually do have 4 Plague Priests in the game, reducing their upkeep cost by 50% almost seems trivial. So, this reducing upkeep cost really benefits in the early stages of the campaign, which you will definitely be recruiting loads of these units early in the campaign. So, that's why he didn't quite get a 10 out of 10, because it's not something that's going to be super valuable throughout the campaign, very useful at the beginning, and that's about it. Now, in terms of faction power, he's going to get an 8 out of 10. This is really kind of where he let himself down here. Storm Demon increases Public Order +2 all provinces, which is good, but due to the new way that Public Order is being reworked, this is no longer essential. So, this would have normally probably netted him a 9 out of 10, maybe even 10 out of 10, but now it just isn't really that useful because revolts are going to be far less often, far less predictable, and so Public Order these faction-wide bonuses of Public Order aren't as essential for the Skaven. I don't find myself revolting that much. Now, another thing that he provides is the Warp Tech Academy. He increases the loyalty of Warlock Masters, which is good, and increases the capacity of Warlock Engineers, which is also good, but not essential. So 8 out of 10 I think is a solid number. But in terms of comparing him to the other 10 out of 10 Legendary Lord, being Alariel, he just doesn't provide anywhere near as much as what she provides to her army and to the faction. And that's why Ichaclaw is the best Skaven Legendary Lord, but not a 10 out of 10 Legendary Lord in this game. Anyway, that's my Legendary Lord comparison list. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do keep in mind that I don't evaluate these lords based on the factions that they're in. So Ichaclaw is not gaining any points for the Forbidden Workshop. But if, on a side note, we were to compare them, it would go like this. Clan Scryer is probably number 2. Number 1 would have to be the Shadowy Dealings, just because of Plunge into Anarchy. That is the most OP ability, not only in this game, but in any Total War game. And at number 3 would actually be the Flesh Laboratory, because it applies to individual units, it doesn't apply faction-wide. That's why the Forbidden Workshop, I mean,
A good flay to die.
unlimited ammo on Rattling guns, that is just ridiculous. Plus nukes. The Flesh Laboratory is great, but the other ones are just a little bit better than it. And the other 3 factions don't even get anything in particular special, apart from maybe Skrulk with Plagues. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it, and I'll see you next time, fuckers. Appreciate you.